how does the way in which the Iraq War ends affect our ability to achieve all of these things? If we do now finally a counterinsurgency, as we know, counterinsurgencies take 7 years, 10 years to be successful, if they're ever successful. If we leave 10 years from now, 7 years from now, 3 years from now, how will that be different? How will that affect our ability to do all of these other important things compared to if we left this year and next? I believe that in either case, whether the last U.S. combat force unit leaves 12 months from now or 7 years from now, the result will be largely the same. In post-U.S. combat troop Iraq, there is likely to be chaos. There is likely to be a higher level of bloodshed. There is nothing much that we can do about that. Staying on longer won't significantly alter that outcome. Now, we as Americans don't like to hear that. We as Americans have a can-do attitude and think that if we just work harder, work smarter, spend more money, there will always be a good outcome, or at least not a bad outcome. In this case, we have to face the truth that there is going to be a bad outcome in Iraq no matter what we do. The administration has created circumstances in which there is no good outcome. But let's concede the possibility that if we stayed on for 3 or 5 years, that the post-U.S. Iraq chaos might be somewhat less. We don't know that that's true. There's really no reason to believe that. But let's concede it for the sake of argument. How much less? There's no way of knowing that either. And how much is it worth to us as the United States to have that slight difference in chaos? Is it worth another 3,000 dead Americans? Is it worth another 100,000 dead Iraqis? Is it worth another $500 billion? Is it worth our inability to do all of the things that we need to do to fight the war on terror? I think it's extremely unlikely that the difference in post-U.S. chaos is worth any of those things, let alone all of them. Will the chaos that does come about strengthen terrorism? Will it create a regional war? Well, that's one of the things we're hearing. That if we leave too soon, there will be a regional war. Now, I know that Iraq and Vietnam are very different, and most analogies between them fail. But it does strike me that this threat of the regional war is very similar to the domino theory in Iraq, in Vietnam. The domino theory in Vietnam was, as you recall, we were told that if the United States got out of Vietnam, all the other countries in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, would all fall to communist governments. It didn't happen. It was never going to happen. It couldn't happen. And I find it very difficult to imagine a scenario where, because of increased chaos in Iraq, the Jordanian military, the Iranian military, the Saudi military, the Turkish military cross the border and start fighting each other. They're smarter than that. They're smarter than we are. They understand the region. They've lived there forever. None of those governments are going to introduce large military units to fight each other in Iraq. They may do what they're already doing, which is to involve their intelligence forces in supporting people inside Iraq. But the threat of some broader regional war, which is always undefined, which no one has ever said, here's the scenario, the realistic scenario for how we get there. The threat of some broader regional war is, I think, largely fictitious. In fact, when U.S. combat troops begin to leave Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, the Gulf states, may in fact be stimulated not to engage in war, but to step up diplomatic efforts inside Iraq and with factions in Iraq and with each other, with or without the United States, to find ways of reducing the chaos and creating stability. Thus, I think the Bush-McCain escalation plan delays the day when we can begin to seriously address the remaining threats from fundamentalist Islamic terrorism. And it makes it more difficult to achieve addressing those threats because it delays the day, and those threats get worse as a result. Why then do we think that Bush is proposing an escalation in Iraq? Because surely some of his advisors somewhere must have told him of an analysis like the one I have just given you today. I've thought about this a lot in the last few weeks, and I've come to the sad conclusion that the president's probably motivated by a desire to avoid or delay the judgment of history, to move the failure in Iraq into the next administration, so that when history writes of the failure in Iraq, he and his supporters will be able to say, well, it wasn't all our fault. After all, the failure occurred in the X administration, not in the Bush administration. They are unable to admit error. They are unable to admit failure. Bush reminds me, in doing this escalation, of a gambler who came to the table and was given a lot of chips and repeatedly made what at that time were foolish bets. What everyone looking on at the time knew were foolish bets. And he depleted all of those chips. And he's now left borrowing chips in a last double-down attempt at a very remote possibility of leaving the table with some chips, with some face. In order to save face, he is not only borrowing money, our grandchildren's money, by running up the debt, but he is also gambling with the lives of Americans. He's gambling with the lives of Iraqis. And he's gambling with U.S. national security. Thanks very much.